Hey guys, I never expected what my grandmother would tell me on her deathbed. She looked at me and said, I need to tell you about the Union general I fell in love with during the Civil War. Can you imagine? My Southern grandmother in a secret romance with a Northern general while our country was at war. She kept this hidden her entire life. The letters, the secret meetings, everything. Today, I'm sharing the forbidden Civil War love story my grandmother confessed right before she died. Family secrets have a way of surprising you when you least expect them. I always thought I knew everything about my grandmother, her strength during tough times, her quiet wisdom, and her deep Southern roots. But I was wrong. It was 3 years ago when I got the call that she didn't have much time left. I rushed to her bedside at the old family home, where the afternoon light filtered through lace curtains she'd sewn decades ago. At 93, her body was failing, but her mind remained sharp as ever. Those final days were mostly quiet, with family coming and going. But on that last evening, when just the two of us remained in the room, something changed in her expression. There's something I need to tell you, she whispered, her voice suddenly stronger. Something about the war, the Civil War. I leaned closer, thinking she was confused. About a Union general named James Williams, she continued, her eyes clear and focused on a memory from long ago. I loved him. We loved each other. I was stunned. Our family had been in the South for generations. Her own father had fought for the Confederacy. A relationship with a Union officer would have been more than scandalous. It would have been dangerous, even deadly. I've kept this secret my entire life, she said, reaching for my hand. But I can't take it to my grave. Someone needs to know our story. And that's when my grandmother began to reveal a love story that would change everything I thought I knew about my family's history. Before I share my grandmother's incredible story, let me set the scene of what America was like during the Civil War. From 1861 to 1865, our nation was literally torn in half. Brother fought against brother as the North Union and South Confederacy battled over fundamental differences about states' rights and slavery. Over 620,000 soldiers died in this bloody conflict, more American deaths than in World War I and World War II combined. In the South, where my grandmother's family lived, supporting the Confederacy wasn't just a political position. It was a matter of loyalty, identity, and survival. Anyone suspected of aiding the enemy could face imprisonment or worse. Communities were tight-knit, and neighbors watched neighbors carefully for any sign of betrayal. For a Southern woman like my grandmother to develop feelings for a Union officer wasn't just frowned upon, it was considered treason. These weren't just opposing sides of a political debate. These were people actively killing each other on battlefields across the country. The divide was absolute. Union soldiers in Southern territory were seen as invaders, occupiers, and enemies. Southern women who associated with Northern soldiers were branded as traitors to the cause and could be publicly shamed, disowned by their families, or even physically harmed. This was the dangerous world my grandmother was navigating when she met General Williams. Every glance, every word between them carried enormous risk. And this is why her confession, all these decades later, was so shocking. Their love didn't just cross battle lines. It defied the very foundations of the society they lived in. My grandmother, Elizabeth Montgomery, was just 19 years old when the war broke out in 1861. She grew up on a modest farm near Richmond, Virginia, not one of those grand plantations you see in movies, but a hard-working family homestead where they primarily grew tobacco and vegetables. Her father, like many Southern men, answered the call to join the Confederate Army almost immediately, leaving Elizabeth, her mother, and two younger brothers to maintain the farm. She often told me stories about those hard years, how she learned to plow fields, negotiate with merchants, and protect her family when Union troops passed through. Elizabeth was known in the community for her intelligence and practicality. Before the war, she had even attended a year of schooling at a ladies' academy in Richmond, unusual for a farm girl. She could read, write, and calculate figures better than most men in the county, which became invaluable as resources grew scarce. What I never knew until her confession was that she also served as an informal nurse, helping tend to wounded soldiers at a makeshift hospital set up in the local church. This detail became important because this is where she would eventually meet General Williams. The war hit their community hard. Food shortages became common by 1863, and Union raids frequently targeted farms for supplies. The Montgomery family, like everyone else, was just trying to survive. We weren't political people, my grandmother told me. We didn't own slaves. My father fought because he believed he was defending his home, not some grand cause. But the war didn't care about our reasons. It took everything from everyone. Little did she know that this conflict that had brought so much destruction would also bring an unexpected love that would challenge everything she believed about loyalty and enemies. General James Williams wasn't one of those famous Union leaders whose names fill history books, but he commanded respect among his men and had a reputation for being firm but fair even to Southerners. At 34, he had already distinguished himself at the Battle of Antietam, where his strategic decisions helped secure a crucial Union victory. Originally from Boston, Massachusetts, he came from a family of abolitionists and joined the Union Army the day after Fort Sumter fell. My grandmother described him as tall with dark hair, serious blue eyes, and a full beard that was common among officers at that time. Unlike some Union commanders, he strictly enforced policies against looting and harassing Southern civilians. This earned him an unusual position of being somewhat respected, even as he was feared and resented as an enemy. In the spring of 1864, General Williams was wounded during a skirmish outside Richmond. Nothing life-threatening, but a bullet to the shoulder that required medical attention. Rather than being transported back north, he was treated at the same makeshift hospital where my grandmother volunteered. He wasn't what I expected. My grandmother told me, her eyes distant with memory, they taught us to hate all Yankees, to see them as monsters. But when I first changed his bandages, he thanked me. He asked about my family with genuine concern. He even apologized for the hardship the war had brought us. What made General Williams particularly interesting was that he spoke with a slight Southern accent. He revealed to my grandmother that his mother had been from Virginia, though she'd moved north after marrying his father. This connection to the South gave him a nuanced understanding of the conflict that many other Union officers lacked. He understood us, even as he fought against us, my grandmother said, and that understanding made him dangerous in a way I never expected. Their first real conversation happened on a stormy April evening. My grandmother was checking on patients when she found General Williams awake, staring out the window at the rain. I couldn't sleep, he told her. The rain on the roof sounds just like my childhood home in Boston. Despite herself, my grandmother lingered. The hospital was quiet, and for a moment, it seemed like the war was far away. They talked about simple things at first, books they'd read, places they'd seen. She was surprised to discover he loved poetry, particularly Walt Whitman. I should have walked away, my grandmother confessed to me. I knew even speaking to him casually was crossing a line. But there was something about the way he listened, really listened, when I spoke. Over the next 2 weeks, as his strength returned, their conversations grew deeper. They debated the causes of the war, respectfully, each understanding the other's position without agreeing. He told her about his home, his family's shipping business, his life before the fighting began. She shared stories of Virginia's countryside, the farm, her dreams of studying more when the war ended. The turning point came when a group of wounded Confederate soldiers arrived at the hospital. Medical supplies were critically low, and tensions ran high. Some wanted the Union officer removed, or even handed over to Confederate authorities. That night, my grandmother discovered General Williams had secretly donated his personal medical supplies, brought from Union lines and intended for his own recovery, to be used for the Confederate wounded. "Why would you do that?" she asked him, confused by this act of compassion for his enemies. "They're boys in pain, same as any others," he replied simply. "This war will end someday, and then we'll all need to remember our humanity." My grandmother said that was the moment everything changed. She realized she was seeing him not as a Union general, not as the enemy, but as a man whose values resonated with her own. It was like seeing clearly for the first time. She told me, her voice soft with the memory. And I knew right then that my heart was in terrible danger. The day before he was to be transferred to a Union prison camp for officers, they found themselves alone in the storage room, where she was gathering bandages. Without planning or even thinking, she reached for his hand. Neither of us spoke. My grandmother said, "We didn't need to. We both knew that something impossible had begun." What happened next still amazes me. General Williams was indeed transferred to the prison camp, but it was only about 15 miles from our family's farm. And somehow, against all odds, they found ways to meet. The first message came through an unlikely source, a 12-year-old boy who sold vegetables to both the prison camp and local families. He delivered a note hidden inside a hollowed-out turnip. My grandmother nearly threw it away before noticing her name carefully written on a scrap of paper inside. "The system we developed was elaborate," my grandmother explained. The boy didn't know what he was carrying. He thought he was just delivering vegetables and taking scraps back for his family's pigs. Their codes evolved quickly. Different vegetables meant different meeting times. A carrot meant sunset. A potato meant midnight. A bundle of herbs indicated which location. Rosemary for the creek bend, time for the old oak behind the church, mint for the abandoned mill. My grandmother would slip out under various pretexts, gathering late herbs, checking on a sick neighbor, or during the chaos following Union cavalry movements when everyone was distracted. Sometimes she could only get away for minutes. Occasionally, they managed an hour together. "We met 7 times over 3 months," she told me. 7 meetings that I replayed in my mind for the rest of my life. She described how they would talk, share news, and simply exist together in these stolen moments. Sometimes they read poetry to each other. He had memorized entire passages of Whitman and Shakespeare. She taught him Virginia folk songs. The danger was constant. Twice, she narrowly avoided Confederate patrols. Once, she had to hide in muddy water for nearly an hour as soldiers passed by. The punishment, if caught, would have been severe. For both of them. Your great-grandfather, my father, would have killed him with his bare hands if he'd known, she said matter-of-factly. And I would likely have been sent away in disgrace or worse. Their closest call came during their final meeting. A local man known for his hatred of Yankee sympathizers nearly discovered them by the creek. General Williams pulled her into the shadows just in time, his hand covering her mouth to quiet her breathing. They stood frozen together as the man passed within feet of them, his lantern swinging in the darkness. I can still feel his heartbeat against my back from that moment. My grandmother whispered. I was terrified, but also alive in a way I'd never felt before or since. These dangerous meetings created a bond between them that defied explanation. It wasn't just the excitement or forbidden nature of their relationship. It was finding connection precisely when the world was tearing itself apart. As summer turned to fall in 1864, both my grandmother and General Williams faced increasingly impossible choices. The war was changing, my grandmother told me. After Atlanta fell to Sherman, We could feel the Confederacy weakening. Everyone was desperate, and suspicions ran deeper than ever. At the same time, General Williams received word that he would be part of a prisoner exchange. Good news for his freedom, but devastating for their relationship. Once he returned to active duty, they might never see each other again. During what they believed would be their final meeting, they discussed possibilities that seemed both wonderful and terrible. Could she leave everything behind? Her family, her home, her identity as a Southerner? Could he abandon his duty as an officer? Was there any future where they could be together without one or both being branded as traitors? He asked me to come north with him after the war. My grandmother revealed, tears forming even decades later. He had family in Massachusetts who could help us start anew. He promised to wait as long as it took. My grandmother described the torment of her decision. Her father was still fighting. Her mother and brothers depended on her. The community that had raised her would see her choice as the ultimate betrayal. I told him I couldn't answer yet. She said that I needed time. But time was the one thing we didn't have. The night before his transfer, General Williams managed to send one final message. He had somehow obtained a small gold locket containing his photograph in civilian clothes, no uniform to mark him as the enemy. Inside was inscribed, "Beyond all borders." J.W. I wore it hidden beneath my clothes for years, my grandmother said. Even after I married your grandfather, it was my one piece of a life I couldn't choose. The weight of their decisions, duty versus heart, family versus future, loyalty to cause versus loyalty to self, created a turning point that would affect generations to come. Sometimes the bravest choice isn't to fight, she told me, her voice suddenly stronger. Sometimes it's to recognize when the fight has cost too much. After General Williams was transferred back north as part of the prisoner exchange, their communication became nearly impossible. The war was intensifying, and mail between North and South was unreliable and heavily scrutinized. We had arranged one final contingency, my grandmother explained, a Union-sympathizing shopkeeper in Richmond who agreed to forward letters. I sent 2 messages that fall, but I never knew if they reached him. As 1864 drew to a close, the war's outcome was becoming clear. The South was losing. Food grew scarcer than ever on the Montgomery farm. Then in December, devastating news arrived. My grandmother's father had been killed at the Battle of Nashville. Everything changed with Father's death, she said quietly. Mother collapsed from grief. My brothers were too young to manage alone. Any thoughts I had of leaving after the war died with my father. When Richmond fell in April 1865, chaos enveloped the region. My grandmother described hiding in their cellar as troops moved through, the sky orange with distant fires. Through it all, she clutched the locket, wondering if General Williams might be among the Union forces, if by some miracle they might find each other again. But it wasn't to be. After Lee's surrender at Appomattox, my grandmother's focus became survival. The farm was nearly ruined, Confederate money worthless. She took odd jobs, sewing and teaching to keep the family fed during those brutal Reconstruction years. 6 months after the war ended, I received a package. She told me, no return address, just my name in his handwriting. Inside was a copy of Whitman's Leaves of Grass and a pressed flower, a Virginia bluebell, but no letter. I knew he was telling me he was alive and that he remembered. In 1867, she married my grandfather, Thomas Jenkins, a widowed Confederate veteran with a small but stable carpentry business. By all accounts, it was a good marriage of mutual respect and companionship. They raised 3 children, including my mother. Thomas was a good man, she said firmly. He gave me a stable life when everything was broken. I grew to love him deeply, though differently than... She trailed off. She never saw General Williams again, though she admitted to scanning newspaper announcements from the North for years, looking for his name. 60 years, my grandmother whispered, her breath shallow. 60 years I've carried this secret. I sat beside her, holding her frail hand as she continued her extraordinary story. The afternoon had faded into evening, and the room was now lit only by a small bedside lamp casting long shadows. "Why tell me now?" I asked gently. "After all this time?" She turned her head slightly on the pillow to look at me. "Because someone should know the truth. Because love, even impossible love, deserves to be remembered." Her fingers weakly reached for the small drawer in her bedside table. "Open it," she instructed. "The false bottom. Press the right corner." I did as she asked, amazed to find a hidden compartment containing a small gold locket tarnished with age, and a pressed bluebell flower so fragile it seemed it might disintegrate at a touch. Beneath these lay a book, Whitman's Leaves of Grass, its pages yellowed and spine cracked from countless readings. "I never told your grandfather," she confessed. "It would have hurt him for no reason. But I read this book every year on the anniversary of the day James and I last met. What moved me most was realizing she had protected everyone around her, her husband, her children, her community, from a truth that might have hurt them while privately honoring a love that had shaped her. I've wondered my whole life what happened to him," she said, "whether he married, had children, whether he ever thought of me." I checked northern newspapers whenever I could. In 1888, I found a small mention. He had become a state senator in Massachusetts, advocating for reconciliation between North and South. Her eyes filled with tears. He kept his promise in his own way. He worked to heal the divide between us, even when we couldn't be together. The most surprising revelation came when she told me about a trip she took to Boston in 1913, the only time she'd ever traveled north. She was 71 years old, visiting a cousin. She had told everyone. "I went to his office," she admitted. "I didn't go in, just stood across the street and watched him exit the building. He was old then, too, walking with a cane. Still tall, though stooped. Still handsome." "Did he see you?" I asked. "No," she whispered. "It was enough just to know he'd had a good life." I left the next day and never went back. After my grandmother passed away the next morning, I became the keeper of her secret and of the small collection of treasures that proved her incredible story. The locket, the pressed flower, and the well-worn book of Whitman's poetry now sit in a special box in my home. Her confession changed how I understood not just my family history, but the Civil War itself. History books talk about battles, presidents, and political movements. They rarely capture the complex human hearts caught in the middle of these grand events. I did some research after she died, digging through archives and old newspapers. I confirmed that General James Williams had indeed become a Massachusetts state senator, advocating for policies of reconciliation with the South. He never married, something that takes on new meaning knowing my grandmother's story. What strikes me most about their love story is how it challenges the neat divisions we create: North versus South, loyalty versus betrayal, right versus wrong. My grandmother lived in the complicated space between these absolutes, loving both her family and a man she was supposed to hate. Sometimes I wonder how different our family might have been if she had made a different choice, if she had gone north after the war. Would I even exist, or would some other descendant be telling a very different story? I believe my grandmother shared this secret with me, not just to unburden herself, but to pass on a profound truth: that humanity exists beyond the battle lines we draw, that love can flourish in the most unlikely circumstances, and that sometimes the choices that shape our lives are made in quiet moments rather than grand gestures. Her story reminds us that history is always more complex, more human, and more heartbreaking than the simplified versions we learn. and that behind every historical event are thousands of personal stories, some heroic, some tragic, but all profoundly human. As for evidence of this remarkable story, I have more than just my grandmother's words. The locket still contains a faded photograph of a handsome man in civilian clothes, his serious expression softened by kind eyes. The inscription "Beyond All Borders," JW, remains visible inside. The pressed bluebell, though delicate, has retained a hint of its blue color after all these decades. Recently, I discovered something else. While going through old family documents, I found a property tax record from 1864 that noted damage to south field fence due to Union activity. The date matches exactly when my grandmother said she and the general met by the creek. It's a small detail, but it adds another piece of confirmation to her story. I've often thought about sharing this story more widely, perhaps documenting it properly for historical societies or even writing a book. The Civil War may have ended over 150 years ago, but its echoes still resonate through American families like mine. I believe there are countless untold stories like my grandmother's, personal histories that never made it into official records, but shaped lives and lineages nonetheless. How many other forbidden romances, acts of compassion, or private rebellions occurred amid the chaos of war? How many secrets have already been lost to time? I encourage you to talk to your older family members, to ask questions about the past, to preserve their stories before they're gone. History isn't just found in textbooks. It's in our family trees, our attics, our heirlooms, and sometimes in deathbed confessions that reveal extraordinary truths. My grandmother's secret love story reminds us that even in our darkest, most divided times, human connection can transcend the boundaries we create, and that perhaps is the most important legacy of all.